We now begin Hindu Lit for Life's final session at the showplace. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our partners, TV partner Doordarshan, bookstore partner Stamark, furniture partner JFA Modphone, Wi-Fi partner ACT FiberNet, gift partners Focus Art Gallery, water partner Bisleri, beverage partner The Brew Room, and event manager Aura. H.S. Shivaprakash is in conversation with N. Manu Chakravarthy in the Unbroken line, Colors of Kannada Literature next. I invite the panelists to please take the stage.
Good afternoon, friends. Well, I'm in conversation with one of the most important voices of the Kannada literary tradition. The unbroken line would also mean points of convergence, divergence, that there is a huge tradition, but that tradition lives only because of the different conceptual idiomatic structures of very distinguished poets like Shivaprakash. So Shivaprakash, welcome. Let's begin with a basic question, which actually is not a question but a statement. When we talk of the colors of Kannada literature, when we talk of Kannada as a language and a culture, let's also pay some attention to the negotiations that Kannada has had with several cultures, languages, most importantly beginning with Sanskrit. In fact, one of the most important texts, 9th century text, Kaviraja Marga, Sri Vijaya. The important expression being in that text, Vasudha Valaya Vilinam. So, it's a text that deals with Kannada as a language, part of the world, Vasudha, but it's also the Sthaliya, the Sthala, the local, the specific, the personal, also creating for itself, the Kannada cosmos also creating for itself the Jagat, the universal. So the blend, the interface of the local and the global. In fact, the unbroken line would also mean an extension of idiom, idiomatic structures, grammatical structures. And I ask this question not in relation to a text, but in relation to a person like Shivaprakash who has inherited that tradition, internalized all those nuances, cadences, and continues to work within the tradition, lending it a new idiomatic vision. So it's asking him to relate him to the tradition from which he has borrowed and how he is extending its dimensions and frontiers.
Well, I am inheritor not to one tradition, in fact to two traditions. My mother was from Tamil Nadu, so I grew up listening to the stories, Silapadikaram, stories of Alvas and the Nayanmas and so on. My father was a Sanskrit scholar, so I had Sanskrit also at home. And when I started writing poetry, I decided to go deep into old Kannada classics. I read a lot of old Kannada texts, which many of my contemporaries and my seniors hadn't done. Later, if I look back, the negotiations Kannada literary tradition had with other languages, everybody talks about its negotiations with Sanskrit, which I think is overstated. With all due respect to Sheldon Pollock, has overstated the case of Kaviraja Marga. And then, but it's very strange that Kannada tradition was not at all influenced by the Sangam tradition. And Tamil influence entered Kannada only during the 12th century Virashaiva movement, because they considered the 63 Nayanmas as Puratanas, the great ancestors. But it's not just in case of Kannada, but also with other Indian languages. One of the greatest influences on the shaping of Indian languages in the first millennium was Prakrit. And it has not been paid sufficient attention. For example, Vaddaradhane, the first prose work in Kannada, was deeply influenced by Prakrit literature. So the Prakrit component of Indian culture is very important because Sanskrit was never the spoken language of any place. It was a kind of lingua franca. So North India spoke different Prakrits. Maharashtra and Maharashtri Prakrit, and Mahavira taught in Ardhamagadi, Buddha taught in another dialect of Prakrit, which came to be called Pali. Pali just is not the language, name of the language, it's the name of the, it means text. So Pali is the language of the Buddhist text. So Kannada at least has been the heir to Sanskrit, Tamil, Prakrit, and in the 20th century, to English. So all these languages have shaped the nuances of Kannada literary idiom.
To extend it a bit further, I would also like you to respond to the genius of Kannada cosmology. See, let me just make a reference to what happened in Europe, in particular to, let's say, the publication of Nebrija's text, because I want you to show where the genius of Kannada lies. That when he goes to Antonio Nebrija, Grammatica Castellana, 1492, goes to Queen Isabella and says that there should be a single language which leads to a single empire consolidating itself. So here, if we extend it, Kannada, in spite of monarchies, in spite of, let's make use of the word state, power, authority, did manage, with all these counter traditions, did manage to deal with and not succumb to any kind of power, any kind of state power, state authority. So if we extrapolate all these things, what would you say, because I will turn to these questions in a detailed manner later on, what would you say has been Kannada's encounter with, because of its multiple traditions, linguistic traditions, and also its many encounters with power, with authority, with state, that this did not happen in the case of Kannada as it perhaps did in the case of, let's say, the European languages?
I think in the context of not only Kannada, Indian languages, the emergence of literary cultures doesn't have much to do with monarchic or imperial formations. And it's alleged that with Kaviraja Marga, because of the Rashtrakuta formation, Kannada literary culture emerged. One kind of Kannada literary culture emerged. If you look at the recent work done by Professor Shettar in his Hadegannada, which is analyzing all these inscriptions of the first millennium, he has looked into thousands of them. There was another dialect of People's Kannada emerging in the inscriptions, which was different from the Sanskritized Kannada, which was developed at the court of Rashtrakutas. And remember, the Rashtrakuta Empire produced the first poetic works the Rashtrakuta Empire produced in the Kannada-speaking land are Sanskrit poems of Jinasena Acharya and Gunabhadra Acharya, Purva Purana and Mahapurana, which Pampa later did into Kannada, much better than the Sanskrit original poet. So, for example, look at the Sangam poetry. There was no imperial formation in ancient Tamil. These Cholas and Cheras and Pandyas, they were petty kings fighting at war with each other all the time. So there was no political unity, but there was a literary unity across Tamil and in the border areas also. Even Mysore, which was called Erumayu in Sangam texts, and Kasargod, which is called Koshara in Sangam text, has also contributed. Poets from these regions have also contributed some poems to the repertoire of Sangam poetry. So there can be linguistic unity without political unity. If you look at the history of literary cultures of northern India, all these different Prakrits, they united the other side of the Vidyas, and there was never, hardly ever, political unity across different regions of North India. And how about the emergence of Bhakti culture, Bhakti literature in Tamil Nadu? It was not produced because of royal or imperial patronage. For example, this great Tamil poet Periyalvar has this famous poem, Pallandu, Pallandu, Pallayiruttandu, where it looks like it's a Brahmin priest blessing a crowned king. At the end he says, I will not bless any king of the earth, I bless only Narayana, the king of the three rivers. And Appa says, Nam Akkumallo, we are not afraid of anybody. And the same spirit, the same indifference, intrepidity with respect to the powers that be, this is a theme that runs right through our Bhakti traditions, a point which our so-called Bhakti scholars like Balagangadhar has completely missed.
Let's push this in another direction because it also leads me to look at your works later on. You see, if we mark out certain phases, because I'm also trying to relate it to your own preoccupation, your own works. Let's mark out the 11th, 12th centuries, Vachanakaras, as an important segment because it's also your major engagement as a poet and as a playwright. I will come to that a little later. And when we talk of the Vachanakaras, if you look at Basava, but equally importantly, Allama, so that the Vachanakara tradition is not a homogeneous tradition, but there is a heterogeneity within that tradition.
Yes.
And if Basava represents one kind of a vision, Allama leans more towards the Buddhist because post 2nd century Nagarjuna, now Allama moves towards that. So there is this heterogeneity, there is this divergence. And all these are extended in your very important works. So you work within the tradition because you also draw from the pluralities, from the multiple nature of this tradition. So there is no homogenization. Come to 16th, 17th century, you mentioned it, but when you come to Janna, Yashodhara, Charite, so it's a whole spectrum. Now, when we try to put all these together, because we can't have a detailed discussion on all these things, now drawing from all these, because I also want to move to your works in a bit, how would you today reflect on your own works, because we must move into your own craftsmanship and your own vision. Look at the 11th, 12th century, the divergent patterns, the 16th century, and as you mentioned, Pampa, Kumaravyasa, borrowing, extending, modifying, transforming. Now, as you began, where would you situate yourself today, looking back to, let us say, Milarepa, almost 4 decades before?
See, intelligent people are happy with one guru. Stupid people like me need many gurus. So I've learned from so many gurus. I've learned from Jaina poets like Pampa, right up to Janna. I've learned from all Vachana poets who are often referred to by the misnomer Virashaiva poets or Lingayat poets. This is nonsense because, you see, you talked about the ascetic emphasis in Allama, the devotional engagement in Basavanna, and something else in Akamahadevi. But why do we forget the contribution of artisan poets? Because Basavanna says, Madara Chennai Namagana, I am the son of, else in the place he says, I am the bastard of Madara Chennai. That even says legal son, I am a bastard of. So they are the progenitors of the Vachana movement. So the three major voices in Vachana expression, one is devotional mystical, Basavanna, Kamadevi, etc., and Allama Prabhu, devotional, Allama Prabhu, mystical, which moves towards a kind of Nirguna Bhakti. And then you have the artisans who I think pioneered a unique kind of spiritual tradition in the whole of India. This can be called Kayaka Yoga, which is the critique of Karma Yoga preached in the Bhagavad Gita. Because karma means dharma, dharma means dana, dana is given to such and such people deserving. Whereas, and who gave and who received it? Where did all these kings get this bounty to give it as charity to the poor? As William Blake said, there will be no.
Pity would not be if we did
yes,
not keep
there
somebody
would not been so many poor. Charity would be no more if there had not been so many poor. Okay. So here, this is the stolen wealth. And Vachanakaras often refer to Parasati Paradana. Where they were talking about these kings who gave it in the form of charity to deserving within courts. Well, Kayaka means you have to serve your guru, you have to pay to your guru the proceedings of honest labor. This is a very important part of Vachana tradition. And also, the Vachana tradition, people say, is Virashaiva Sahitya. I don't believe so, because this later, the kind of epic literature that was until anthologies produced of Vachanas, they can be called Virashaiva literature. But the dynamism of Vachana tradition continued in Kodekal Basaveshwara's tradition and in the Tattvapadakaras of North Karnataka. So this revolt, the torch of revolt was kept ablaze, not by Virashaiva inheritors of Vachana tradition, but by non-Virashaiva inheritors of Vachana traditions. And I have learned from all of them. And they've all shaped my, and also folk poets. The folk poets, we have a folk poet, nothing as folk poets, the Madiga community of Karnataka who produced this great epic Malay Madheshwar Purana. It's supposed to be longer even than the Finnish epic of Kalevala. So I've learned from them. And of course, I've learned from Vilangodigal, the author of Sthilapati Garam, and Tamil Shaivite poets, Vaishnavite poets, and of course poets from all over the world. So I produced a book of, I wouldn't call them translations, I call it Marurupagalu in Kannada. It's something like what Robert Lowell would call imitations. I've translated all my favorite poets from all these languages, representing all the streams of poetry that I admire. And all of them have contributed to the making of my creativity.
And also pertinent to think of Basava acknowledging Mante Swami.
Yes.
Very much.
Yes. But Mante Swami is the next phase of what Basava represented, because I think 12th century Sharanas, they addressed a limited audience of Sharanas, whereas the traditions of Mante Swami and Malay Madheshwara is open to everybody. And they moved beyond the symbolism of the Ishtalinga. The key episode in Mante Swami story is that he makes the Shivalingams worn by the Lingayat priests vanish, and all of them go into his toddy pot. So look for your Shivalingam with this toddy pot. He says, I have taken away Woody Muttida Linga, the man-made Linga, chisel-shaped Linga. I have given you a Linga which no chisel can shape.
Shivaprakash, let me turn to, for obvious reasons, your first collection, Milarepa. That you draw from a Tibetan tradition. What I am trying to find out from you, which I would like you to share with us, is that as a yogi, now that he loses every body, but with his yogic powers, he could have resurrected all of them. That's how this story goes about Milarepa. But what's important for me is that in your first collection, 1977, I think you had already started moving 4 decades ago towards the recognition of impermanence, of not wanting to establish any hierarchical, eternal structures, recognizing. So it's not just a poetic expression, it's also a philosophical statement. And 4 decades ago you made it. And therefore, you see that there is not just a poetic expression, but there is also an acknowledgement of the fact that everything moves into a state of shunya. And Allama Prabhu talks of the shunya sampadane. So today, when you look back, you had already 4 decades ago started integrating all these and moving towards your own realization of shunya. So can you say something about going back?
So
4
one of the
decades?
things I wanted to do in my poetry and later in my plays was to integrate into Kannada the streams of traditions which are underrepresented in the past of my literature. I discovered that Buddhism was underrepresented. And at one point of time, I got very deeply involved in Buddhism. I practiced a lot of vipassana meditation. Then I got into different schools of Buddhism and so on. And then there's a lot of Jaina element in my writings. My latest play, Mastakabhisheka rehearsal, is deeply influenced by Jaina. And even my plays, some of my plays are deeply influenced by Jainism and Sufism. So these are elements which were either absent or underrepresented in the literary tradition I inherited. I wanted to bring it in. And I got interested in Marxism and Buddhism at the same time. And both of them emphasize, in different ways, the evanescence of things. And it's important to remember this dimension of evanescence to avoid building what Vachanakaras called sthavara, static structures.
Thavara Kalivun.
So structures have to be jangama, dynamic. So this is what I learned from Buddhism. And later, of course, I was almost a Buddhist for couple of decades. Then later I moved towards Shaivism of Kashmir, which I consider to be my faith. I would describe myself as a follower of the Spanda school of Kashmir Shaivism, which again emphasizes the dynamism of experience. So Spanda means vibration. All our existence is in the form of vibration, it's never static. So this has been a major concern, not only in the philosophical perception, my perception of the world, but also in, if you pay attention to it, even the forms that I create. They're not rigid forms. I'm not a formalist. But forms are brittle. And I want to emphasize the brittleness of forms.
And as Eliot would say, words to perish. So they perish, they fade away. So you cannot
They perish, they fade away, they come back.
Then they come back.
They come back.
And so there's a renewal, there's a transformation.
Yeah, like
you won't use the same word in the same manner.
Like a spanda, you have in spanda, yasyon mesha meshabhyam jagata pradayodayo tam shakti chakra pravayo varam shankaram stumaha. There is unmesha, it appears, and nimesha disappears. So this is how it proceeds. So this is the important preoccupation, not only in the content of my works, but also in the structures that I try to build in my poetry, and also in the kind of plays I write.
You see, talking of this unbroken line and also the extensions you have made, let's turn to, in my opinion, one of the finest poems, Samagara Bhimava. So I see the other Sharnes, Akmahadevi, all those resonances, but Samagara Bhimava also has this most important dimension, that here is a prostitute who saves Nagalingayati. Not just Nagalingayati, but also as a paradigm, as a symbol, as a very, very dynamic symbol of the womanhood, feminine spirit, saving the community, perhaps saving whatever comes her way as the savior, which I think, you see, is to belong to Akmahadevi, is to embrace the feminine spirit, which also moves towards a certain kind of redemption, of salvation, of a certain kind of hierarchy created by a masculine order. So could you also talk a little about Samagara Bhimava, which I think
Samagara Bhimava was not a prostitute. She was an untouchable girl. She was a virgin. And the legend goes, for those who have not read this poem, that a great yogi, Nagalinga yogi, who had so many achievements in the field of yoga, once he was struck with a terrible fever, which was fatal, and this virgin looked at him, her heart melted for him. Though she was a virgin, milk started flowing out of breast. She fed him on that and he was revived. This is the legend. Now what I'm trying to do in this poem is to critique the traditional spirituality, which is otherworldly. It's a rejection of Hinayana kind of spirituality, which says that you should go out of this world like a lamp being blown out. And defense of a kind of inclusive kind of Mahayana kind of spirituality, which is important for our times. And I hadn't worked it out philosophically at that, but it was just, one doesn't philosophize and then write poetry. Philosophy comes later. And looking back, I think I was trying to, express in that poem the essence of the tantras, the Shaivite and Shakta tantras, which emphasize the eternity in the moment, like William Blake did. I see the world in a grain of dust and heaven in a wildflower. And so eternity is in love with the creations of time. It is that kind of the defense of this world in which the spiritual inheres that I was trying to express in that poem. Though I couldn't reason this out like I do now. But later many of my poems have gone back to this preoccupation. But sometimes I get whatever with Samagara because I wrote this some 35 years ago. Everybody is talking only about that. They don't talk about the poems I wrote later, like Shamstabriz and Nagarjuna and so many other poems which took this theme forward.
You mentioned that, but let me also turn to Mahachaitra for a very important reason, Shivaprakash. The way in which you construct the play, I'll just taper it down.
Yeah.
Well, to make it brief, that Mahachaitra is also about, Basva exclaiming, Anudeva Horgadavanu. And also that holding on to Kudala Sangamadeva, that he becomes an anamika of an alienated. And this has been your very, very important, I would say, creative and political statement, that you look at the outsider, and the outsider state of Basva is what constitutes Mahachaitra, which I think is a very important statement for our times. So what would you say today? Because I will move to Sultan Tipu a little later.
So to answer this question briefly, you see, in theatre, the most boring characters are the saintly characters, like Basavanna, Gandhi and Ambedkar and so on. So what I did, I want to make the play interesting, I just kept him out. I used the technique, what is called Parokshanayaka in Sanskrit drama, which Bhasa used in as Pratigna Yugandarayana. Okay? That was the technique I used. But in the sense that we don't know what Basavanna, there are different images of Basavanna, which different people from different classes and castes talk about. And the play is about the kind of conflict between these images. It was a political statement in a sense that different groups of people are trying to claim Basavanna. On the one hand, Lingats claim Basavanna to be their own, and some Brahmins also claim that Basavanna was just repeating what Shankaracharya said, and nothing has happened in India after Shankaracharya. Just as a Muslim says, nothing happens in the world after Prophet Muhammad. The seal of Prophet Shankaracharya, the seal of saints, something of that kind. Though Shankaracharya was torn apart by Ramanacharya and Madhvacharya and Abhinavaguptacharya, that's a different thing. So, Basavanna is in different dimensions. All great figures who influence history, like Basavanna, Ambedkar, Karl Marx, we try to reduce them to one point of view. But they're interesting because they're not very consistent. and there are so many different potentials and possibilities and conflicting possibilities in them. So in that sense, it was a political statement. And this brings me to Tipu Sultan, because when I read about Tipu Sultan, and he had been represented as a Muslim fanatic by Islamic historians, and also by the British historians, as a defender of Hinduism by Hindu nationalists.
And also as an anti-colonial
hero. But I got interested in the theme of Shahadat, which is found in the Kannada folklore and in the esoteric Sufi traditions about Tipu Sultan. So I wanted to...
And also trying to reconstitute the meaning of jihad.
Yes, jihad.
Which is very important in the
jihad,
play.
It was already becoming... Today, jihad has become one of the greatest threats to mankind. But the original meaning of jihad was not this. Jihad was ultimately struggle against oneself. And this is what I tried to... In the last scene of the play, is Tipu goes to the last battle. And this is what he says now. I surrender my will to Parvardigar, and I wear the turban of Paigambar and hold the holy sword of Hazrat Ali, and Hazrat Ali was a martyr. So the theme of martyrdom, Shahadat, which is sacrifice of the self, rather than killing somebody for your faith, that I wanted to bring in through this play.
What I find important is also that the play can be read as an attack against those who don't understand religious cosmologies. So it's also an attack against very shallow, rational secularists. That I think is also important when we move towards the end of the play, because you are also making a statement about contemporary times.
Because I feel that the shallow secularism and fundamentalism are two sides of the same coin. So one cannot exist without the other.
They reconstruct.
And if you want to recapture the quintessence of religious and spiritual traditions, you have to reject both.
So we open it up for questions and answers.
Good evening, Shivaprakash. Sorry? Yeah. Actually, you had two great gurus, that was P. Lankesh and T.G. Vaidyanathan, and you always spoke to me about D.H. Lawrence and John Updike when we were in college. And did not they influence you? And another thing, I look at the title, and you never came to the literature of 1960, 70, and the other theatre, and your Anantamurthy, or Lankesh, Chandrasekhar Patil. It was not touched, so I was wondering why.
Because when I was dealing with great giants like Pampa, Basavarna, Daka Mahadevi, I had no time for these 20th century writers. And if 20th century, I have only two gurus, poetry, three, Kuvempu, Gopal Krishnadiga, and K.S. Narasimha. Other writers are interesting. I may have learnt a few things. Some of them have been my close friends, some of them have been my enemies, some of them have been friends for some time and enemies for some time. But they did influence my writings because I wanted to, to embody all the riches of the tradition. I didn't want to. Once Puthi Narasimhachar told me, this modern literature is panthika, is sectarian. And only if you believe in a certain ideology can. But whereas our ancient literatures, the Bhakti literature, is not for a sect, it is universal. So I believed in that kind of universalism, even now when post-structuralism calling universalism a bluff.
Contribution from Tamilians to Kannada literature in the olden days, like Master Venkateshwara Iyengar and all. But of late there has been kind of more of an animosity than interaction between Kannada and Tamil literature or otherwise also. Can you elaborate?
If you define Kannada-Tamil relationship, only in terms of Kaveri dispute. It sounds like that. It's more than that because Kaveri flows through both the states. So let's not reduce the Kannada Tamil exchange to this recent development, which is kind of nurtured by the powers that be in both the states. No, there has been exchanges. For example, Harihara, Kannada poet, rewrote some of the portions of Periya Purana in his Ragades. Is one about Sundaramurti Nayanar and Karikalamiyar and so many of them. And after the 12th century efflorescence, in about 15th century, there was a narrative poem about the great saint Allama Prabhulingalile by Chamarasa, which within 100 years was translated into Tamil by a poet called Shivaprakash Sabya. In fact, my mother was from Tamil Nadu. She named me after a Tamil poet, Shivaprakash. And this text was discovered in Yarpadam in Sri Lanka. So, and of course, when you come to modern Kannada literature, three stalwarts, Masti Venkateshayangar and Puti Narasimhacha, Guru Ram Swami Iyengar, all of them are of Tamil origin. There was another G.P. Rajaratnam. So Tamil, and I am also half of Tamil. Kailasam, I don't take him seriously. So all these people have contributed to the modern Kannada literature.
Not in the contemporary literature.
I am here in the contemporary literature. I am not yet dead.
The Kailasam was a big trend, you can't talk like that.
Huh?
He's a very big trend. He created a big trend, even in linguistics,
Kailasam.
He broke the barriers,
I see. But I don't think it was, at least the kind of theatre I practice, there's no place in that. Some people who are, others could say are great, don't seem great to me. For example, I respect Sri Lanka was a great scholar, his translation of Natya Shastra is fantastic. But I don't enjoy reading his plays, I don't enjoy watching his plays. What can I do? I find them boring. I find them boring.
Yes, I agree.
We have time for one last question.
Sir, it's kind of fascinating that you haven't mentioned someone like Chandrasekhar Kambar in your list of gurus. So how do you relate to him, or how does his work relate to you, etc.?
So, whenever I talk to Chandrasekhar Kambar, I call him Guruji. But I know that he has also learnt a few things from him. I have learnt a few things from him. So it's a kind of give and take relationship between us. But I'll come back to that contentious question. Kambar, he's a great, creator of metaphors and word music and all that, and his idiom is very strong. But he came from a rural background, so he has this a priori phobia about everything modern. And I was a city-bred person, and I am not afraid of technology or industrialization. I don't want to be cowed down by them, but I am not afraid of it. So there is a fundamental difference between his view of things and my view of things. But of course, we have a lot of things in common. Both of us have tried to emphasize those aspects of the traditions which were ignored by the literary culture of the colonial and modern period. And about Bendre is a great, trickster with words. Okay, he's very great in that. But I think Kalidasa said, Vak and Artha, Vagartha Vasamprukto. Bendre has only Vak, not much of Artha. So I prefer somebody like Kuvempu is a much greater poet than Bendre. In my humble opinion, if I say this, many Bendre Bhaktas, who are as many as Modi Bhaktas, may shoot me down, I don't know.
I don't know if you remember, tell us one poem of Kuvempu or Adiga. The one I remember, only the sense of it, I don't remember the words, about night where he's equating it to death. Kuempu's poem, I think. And Adiga's, any poem. The one I remember is about, a few I remember, but if you remember anything.
ಯಾವ ಮೋಹನ ಮುರಳಿ ಕರೆಯಿತು ದೂರ ತೀರಕ್ಕೆ ನಿನ್ನನು, ಯಾವ ಬೃಂದಾವನವು ಸೆಳೆಯಿತು ನಿನ್ನ ಮಣ್ಣಿನ ಕಣ್ಣನು, ಹೂಹಾಸಿಗೆ ಚಂದ ಚಂದನ ಬಾಹುಬಂಧನ ಚುಂಬನ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಸಾಕೆಂದಿದ್ದೆಯಲ್ಲೋ ಇಂದು ಏನಿದು ಸ್ಪಂದನ ಸುಂದರಪ್ಪ. ಸಪ್ತ ಸಾಗರದ ಆಚೆಯಲ್ಲೋ ಸುಪ್ತ ಸಾಗರ ಮಲಗಿದೆ, ಮೊಳೆಯ ದರೆಗಳ ಮೂಕ ಮರ್ಮರ ಇಂದು ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೂ ಆಹಾಯಿತೆ. ಯಾವ ಮೋಹನ ಮುರಳಿ ಕರೆಯಿತು ದೂರ ತೀರಕ್ಕೆ ನಿನ್ನನು, ಯಾವ ಆ ಬೃಂದಾವನವು ಚಾಚಿತು ತನ್ನ ಮೋಹನ ತನ್ನ ತನ್ನ ಮಣ್ಣಿನ ಕಣ್ಣನು. ನೀನು ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕು ಗೊತ್ತಿದ್ರೆ.
Adiga was influenced by T.S. Eliot, yeah?
No, I don't think so. No. Adiga was more influenced by W.H. Auden than by T.S. Eliot.
Talk about Rashtrakavi concept of after Tagore. We have two Rashtrakavis. Now we are planning to identify third one. What is your comment about that?
I don't need Rashtrakavis. I need Kavis, not Rashtrakavis. If you declare somebody a Rashtrakavi, others become Rashtriya Virodhi Kavis. Just like some people say, if you don't believe in demonetization, you're a Deshodrohi.